Welcome to our program on Kardec Radio. And now, here's our host, Dr. Vanessa Anceloni.
Dear listener, we are here to discuss Emmanuel's novels, and you may be asking why. Just because these novels are the very stories of our own self. Each and every novel is a story about our very lives, if not in this life, previous lives. It's not by chance that he's telling us about characters that very much resonate what happens in our daily lives. If not directly to us, to family members, relatives, friends, colleagues at work, at school, and the public at large. So these stories certainly are the stories of humanity, and they can tell a lot about the pathway that we should follow to really conquer serenity and calmness in our heart. Because the bottom line of each novel is about our relationship with God and the Christ consciousness in general. So Emmanuel brings an invitation to all of us, the invitation to revisit our lives. He has written novels that are about himself. The first one is 2,000 years ago, when he talks about the very man, Publius Lentulus, who was a powerful senator of the Roman Empire, and what happened at his time. We're going to discuss each and every of these novels. Then the second of his novels, through Chico Xavier, was 50 years later, when he talks about the stories of many characters, and one of the central characters is the very reincarnation of the Roman senator, Publius Lentulus, now reincarnated as Nestorius, the slave. But the main character of the book, you will know, is a woman named Dahlia. Then the third novel he wrote is named Hail Christ. In Hail Christ, he's still talking about the first 300 years of Christianity, but the main characters in this book are Quintus Varus and Cassianus, and they talk about many reincarnations and the law of action and reaction. This novel is followed by another one that is fascinating and truly moving. You will see in this renunciation novel the story of a very elevated soul named Alcyone. And the beauty for us who are living in Europe or in the United States is the fact that this novel tells us about the very history of the first waves of European immigrants into North America, which is fascinating. And then finally, he wraps up with the Golden Key, the novel series with Paul and Stephen, which is considered one of the best-selling novels of Emmanuel. There he talks about a fanatical Pharisee named Saul, who later became Paul after he changed his mind about Jesus' teaching, and the legacy he left all of us today. So this is just an overview and we have here with us at Kardec Radio to help us break down the amazing teachings of Emmanuel. We have Carol Stroh-Snyder, who is one of the directors of the Spirit Society of Virginia, and also friend and a collaborator of Kardec Radio, and a member of the Spirit Society of Virginia, John DeRosa. Thank you, Carol. Thank you, John, for being with us here today.
Thank you for having us.
Our pleasure.
So, dear friends, remember, we are here to understand more about these novels because they are really life-changing. Carol, when we talk about Chico Xavier, Emmanuel, there is a story behind it. Oftentimes, people don't know who their mentors were or are. So, Carol, we know that this relationship between a spirit guide, a spirit mentor, and its mentee does not start in this life. Can you tell us, please, more elements about the relationship between the spirit of Emmanuel and the spirit of Chico Xavier?
Well, this relationship is a relationship that has been taking place. It's not over days or years, but over millennium. Chico made public the information that in the book 2,000 years ago, Emmanuel was the senator Publio Lentulus, and Chico was his daughter Flavia. So as we can see, this relationship started a long time ago. And Chico also talks about his relationship with Emmanuel in this lifetime. At the age of 21 was the first time that Chico met or saw the presence of Emmanuel. And one of the first things that Emmanuel asked him was, "Are you ready to work on your minionship?" And Chico said, "Yes, of course." But he said, "Well, but first, you have to know there's a couple of points that you need to know." And Chico said, "Okay, what do I need to know?" "Well, there's 3 things you need to do." And Chico said, "What's the first one?" "Discipline." "What is the second?" "Discipline." "What is the third?" "Discipline." Of course. And Chico, of course, agreed with his statements. And Chico mentions that throughout his life, Emmanuel was like a father with him, a constant presence daily with him, guiding him, and that he constructed his day with discipline and guiding him throughout the day, but also structuring his day so that he would have time to do the different activities and even teaching him different things, since Chico was only able to finish 4th grade education in this lifetime. So as we can see, it's a relationship that spanned many millennia, and in this lifetime, over 80 years. By guiding Chico, Chico was able to psychograph over 400 books in this lifetime, including the ones we're talking about today. Spiritism to a new level, bringing us this knowledge, and especially these 4 books that talk about the different circumstances throughout history. So I think it's a great relationship that has shown us a lot of teachings for now and for the future.
That is true. So it's interesting that these books are inviting people to strengthen their relationship with their mentors, knowing that the history of their lives contains the very members that probably nowadays are taking care of each one of us, right? And as you said, Carol, Emmanuel tells us about the importance of discipline. And in this first book, 2,000 years ago, which is the very story about one of the reincarnations of Emmanuel, the spirit author, in which it takes place the drama of many lives that encompasses power, passion, conspiracy. It is at the very time that Jesus is living on the earth and talks about Pontius Pilate and the emperor who was in charge of the Roman Empire at the time. Roman Senator Publius Lentulus is then spending some time in Palestine during the time of Christ, and he tells of this very meeting he had with Jesus and the healing of his daughter Flavia. Of course, the book focuses on important episodes of the history of Christianity during the 1st century, and there are certainly unforgettable moments, such as the death of the first Christian martyrs. Now, John, what mostly called your attention in this book?
You brought that to the head, that understanding that this took place during Christ's time and that you're actually reading what really took place. It's just so interesting and amazing. You're seeing how Christ attracted the poor, the sick, the homeless, the underprivileged, and, of course, some selected Roman patricians, and how he administered people. That, to me, was what really kept my attention.
It's interesting because we're going like more than 2,000 years ago, and for many people it sounds just like history or the behind the scenes of history, but actually it is not. It can be quite valid for our very present. So bringing this to America, to the United States, what do you think in this book more greatly impact or will more greatly impact for the American reader?
It's a confirmation to me of what Jesus did and how he did it and what he intended his church to really be. No pomp, no ceremony, just fraternal community that helped people, those people in need.
Mm-hmm.
And that it hit home with me, and I can only, of course, talk for myself, but that's what was the lesson, the big lesson I drew out of this.
It's quite interesting what you're saying. What do you yourself think about it, Carol?
It's a great book for us to see how, Publius Lentulus was 2,000 years ago, and his beliefs and understand that he was Emmanuel, Chico Xavier's guide, and see that how much he has evolved, and giving us hope that we can evolve and we can get there too, giving us that understanding that it's okay if we make mistakes today. We have to try to do our best every day, and then one day we'll get there too. So I think gives us strength and hope for the future.
But it also tells us that if you don't make it right today, knowing what is right, you're going to suffer at some point. Like he realizes at the end of the book, he says to himself while he's in Pompeii, it's fascinating because he's talking to his daughter Flavia. Both are blind. The servant, Anna, is there, and he confesses. He says, now that I understand the whole message and the invitation of Jesus, I regret that I was not as humble and I was not as diligent in the spiritual matters as I should have been. And it shows at the end of his life how there are consequences for our choices, no matter if we're going to have another opportunity, but the consequences are there. And sometimes we have everything at hand and we just throw the best opportunity of our lives away because we prefer the material priorities, right?
Yes, I think that's such a key point, because we have heard many times through your teachings and readings that when you are a prominent person, when you're I'll say well-off person, the responsibility is very high for those type of people. And if you don't understand what's required of you, it becomes larger consequences are extracted from you.
And it's amazing because of the book, sorry to interrupt you, but at the end of the book, it's fascinating when he discarnates his wife, who is at a much higher sphere, comes back to help him. He sees all the friends, the family members, but doesn't see her yet. And then his best friend turns to him and say, in order for you to see your wife, who is at a much higher sphere, you need to plead to God in a prayer for repentance, and you need to recognize where you've been this far, and then it will be given to you the opportunity. And that's what he did. He does. He kneels down, and then she comes. But they will be for a while. Can you imagine? She was there by his side for decades, and he didn't recognize. Now that he does, he's going to spend millennia in contact with her, but once a week sometimes, because she is at a much higher sphere. If it were not his attitude in that very life, he would probably have saved millennia of suffering in his own life. And that's exactly what Emmanuel says in the book 2,000 years ago, and we are going to listen to the very excerpt of Jesus' invitation to Emmanuel when Flavia, his daughter, is sick. She has leper. She is almost dying, and his wife asks, please go and talk to the Messiah, no matter if you don't believe, because he's probably the only one that can save our daughter. And he goes for this meeting with Jesus. Let us just listen to this and make some points regarding this, okay?
He let the busy hours of the day slip away with the sunlight in the west, and as twilight poured out of its soft hues on the magnificent landscape, he left, pretending he needed to take a break, and stating he wanted to get to know the town's ancient fountain, one of the main attractions to outsiders. About 300 feet down the road, he met bystanders and fishermen who drew back and looked at him with undisguised curiosity. A whole hour passed as he pondered his anguish, lost in thought. An immense canopy of shadow had begun to settle over the entire region, filled with vitality and fragrances. Where would the prophet from Nazareth be at that moment? Mightn't the tales of his miracles and his enchanting magic over souls be a mere illusion? Wasn't it absurd to be looking for him on this road, disregarding the imperatives of social hierarchy? At any rate, he must be a simple, uneducated man, given his preference for Capernaum and fishermen. Giving free rein to the ideas flowing through his burning and distressed mind, Publius thought that a meeting with the Master from Nazareth was highly unlikely. How would they understand each other? He had not been the least bit interested in a closer understanding of the dialect of the common folk. And Jesus, of course, spoke Aramaic, commonly used in the Tiberias basin. Profound doubts spilled from his mind to his heart, like the shadows of twilight before nighttime. The sky at that time of day turned a wonderful dark blue, whereas the opalescent light of the moon had not waited for the night to set in. The senator felt his heart lost in an abyss of infinite conjectures, beating erratically in his oppressed chest. Conflicting emotions tormented the innermost fibers of his spirit. He was unaware that he had leaned on a stone bench covered in bramble. His mind wandered in deep thought. He had never experienced such a feeling except in that memorable dream he had related only to Flaminius. He recalled the smallest details of his earthly life as he had temporarily abandoned the prison of his physical body. He felt a profound ecstasy before nature and its marvels, unable to express his admiration and acknowledgement of the powers of heaven. Such was the cloister in which he had always confined his proud, unyielding soul. Sweet fragrances seemed to emanate from the gentle waters of Lake Gennesaret, to blend delightfully with the wild scent of the foliage. It was then, as if his spirit were under the imperative of a strange general magnetism, that he heard the light footsteps of someone who had come looking for that same spot. There, before his anxious eyes, stood a unique, unmistakable figure. It was a young man who displayed a gentle and indefinable beauty in his profoundly merciful eyes. Long and silky hair framed his compassionate face like brown strands tinged with the gold of an unknown light. A divine smile, revealing at the same time immense goodness and singular energy, radiated an irresistible appeal from his melancholy, majestic figure. Publius had no difficulty identifying this impressive individual, but sentiments, unbeknownst to him until then, stirred wildly in his heart. Not even his appearance before Tiberius in the grandeur of Capri had aroused such feelings. Burning tears streamed from his eyes, which rarely wept, and a mysterious, invincible power made him kneel on the moonlit grass. He wanted to speak, but his chest felt heavy and suffocated. In a gesture of sweet, supreme goodness, the gentle Nazarene walked towards him like a materialized vision of one of the gods of his ancient beliefs. Lovingly placing his hand on his head, he asked him in an enchanting language, which Publius understood as perfectly as if it were the patrician idiom, indelibly etched in his soul the unforgettable feeling that the words were from spirit to spirit, heart to heart.
Why are you looking for me, Senator? It would have been better if you had come publicly and in broad daylight in order to learn once and for all the sublime lesson of faith and humility. But I have not come into the world to alter the supreme laws of nature. I have come here to meet your ailing soul.
Publius could not express his feelings, except for the copious tears of sorrow for his little daughter. The prophet, however, as if not needing to hear his unspoken words, continued.
No, I have not come to meet the superficial, proud statesman whom only centuries of suffering can lead to the bosom of my Father. I have come in answer to the pleas of a grief-stricken and oppressed heart. But above all, my friend, your sentiment is not what will save your leprous little daughter, forsaken by the science of the world. because your frame of mind is still selfish and human. Rather, it is the faith and love of your wife, for faith is divine. Only one ray of its powerful energies is enough to crush all the monuments of earth's vanities.
Profoundly moved and magnetized by this presence, it seemed to the senator that his soul was floating in a dream world. Such was the extent of the unknown and unexpected emotions flooding his heart. He wanted to believe that his true sentiments were now locked in an incomprehensible game of illusion.
No, my friend, you are not dreaming.
The master said kindly and compellingly, divining Publius's thoughts.
After many years of deviation from the path of the good due to your blatant wrongs, today you have come to the turning point for the regeneration of your entire life. It is up to you, however, to take advantage of it, either now or in a few millennia from now. If the unfolding of human life depends on circumstances, you must consider that they come in all forms, leaving it up to individuals to exert the power of will and sentiment in seeking to align their destinies with the goodness and love for their fellow beings. At this very moment, a glorious point in time has arrived for your spirit, if you can utilize your freedom to forever imprint it on your heart, turning it into a hymn of love, humility, and faith, in the not yet determined moment of redemption within eternity. But no one can impose an act that is against your conscience if it is your desire to spurn this blessed moment indefinitely. I have been the shepherd of human souls since the formation of the world. For many millennia I have tried to reunite my stray sheep to bring their hearts the eternal joys of the kingdom of God and His righteousness. All the powers of your empire are quite tenuous, and all its wealth is paltry. The magnificence of the Caesars is an ephemeral illusion that lasts one day, because all wise men, as well as all warriors, are called at the right time to the tribunals of justice of my Father in heaven. Some day its powerful eagles will cease to exist under a handful of miserable ashes. Its culture will be transformed by the efforts of other workers worthier of progress. Its unjust laws will be swallowed by the dark abyss of these centuries of impiety. For there is only one law, and it will survive the ruins of human unrest, the law of love, established by my Father from the beginning of creation. Now, go home, aware of the responsibilities of your destiny. If faith has established in your house what you regard as bliss because of your daughter's recovery, do not forget that it represents an increase in your soul's duties before our Almighty Father.
Wow, so Carol and John, this is really amazing. Carol, there are certainly so many nuances to this dialogue, to these instructions received by Emmanuel, and no matter how he actually saw the Master in person, he was still incarnated. He heard the word, and the daughter was healed, and it's quite shocking that when he goes back, he just reframes it all and just let it be like a memory and doesn't really acknowledge the whole fact in itself. What other aspects of this dialogue, of this encounter, should we point out, Carol?
Something that's really relevant for us to see is how Jesus is not, I would use the word pushy. He's not pushing Publius and say, you have to believe in me, you have to believe in these things. How kind he is to Publius in the approach to him. and also how kind he is in warning him and saying, if you don't listen to me now, there will be many consequences and you will suffer very much throughout your life, which is exactly what happened. To me, the highlight is how kind Jesus was, and even though he was firm and he explained, he was very kind in his words to Publius.
I think it's a very controversial point because it depends on the maturity of the person to see his kindness. Because if he were evidently kind to everybody, people wouldn't have crucified him. Some people have read this dialogue by Jesus and they thought he was very strong in his statements, and he was quite I'm not going to say pushy, but he was very clear that when he's saying, I haven't come here to talk to the powerful senator. Can you imagine somebody coming to you and saying, I haven't come here to talk to you who are the CEO of X company. I came here because of your husband who has been praying, is faithful and humble. That doesn't sound kind unless we have spiritual maturity.
That's a perfect example of the conscience talking to you. And, of course, you had the ultimate conscience, Jesus, saying it to you. So he just did not want to accept what was put forth to him, whether it was strong or whether it was weak. It was his conscience, of course, Jesus mimicking his conscience. And
yes.
That's what he pushed aside.
And I'm not being in disagreement with Carol. I'm saying the opposite. I'm saying what Carol is saying is an unfoldment of her acceptance to Jesus. But somebody who doesn't accept him that easily will not see that kindness in this dialogue because he's very much like the illuminated spirits that brought us the teachings of the Spirit's book. Oftentimes Kardec was asking questions like, what about this? And they would answer, haven't we answered to you before? If the person is immature, they're going to be very sensitive and say, oh my gosh, why are you saying this to me? But if the person is mature like Kardec, they're going to say, yes, you're right. I have asked that before. You're right. Good point. And that's what I see here. I mean, in this dialogue, Jesus is really bringing people to the attention. As I remember a message by Emmanuel in one of his message books, because he has many other message books besides the novels, and he has a message entitled The Word of the Christ. And he says, a famous passage of the Bible, of the New Testament, in which Paul says the message of Christ is madness for many people. And then Emmanuel makes the comment saying, for those who don't understand Jesus' message, it sounds like crazy, it sounds very impositive, it sounds like pushy, because they are not mature yet. Those who don't feel that it's pushy, it's because they are mature. So it depends on the maturity of the person to really see the kindness that Carol is telling us here. And I agree with you, but I think the perception of the person is going to depend on the level of maturity. And if we open even more, the senator here we're talking about, even though he met Jesus, even though Jesus was very generous, giving back his daughter to their family life and giving him an opportunity to keep on living in spite of his stubbornness, at the very end he realizes, as well as a group of spirits that were living at the time, they need to reincarnate many times to fix themselves up, and that's when he brings to us the second novel 50 years later. In 50 years later, Emmanuel tells the story that is happening also in Christianity in its second century, and it's happening exactly 50 years after the death of the Roman senator Publius Lentulus in the city of Pompeii, when the volcano Vesuvius in Pompeii burst and the whole city is into ashes. So that's how he dies. 50 years later, he reincarnates as Nestorius, the slave. And in his return to earth, this slave embraces a more humble approach, one that his proud heart has oppressed in his previous life. God's mercy allows him to redeem all his excesses and arbitrary acts of the past. When invested by public power, he vainly thought he held all rights and supremacy in his hands. However, this book's main character is in fact a woman named Celia, whose sublime heroism was a beacon on the path of several disheartened and suffering spirits. As Emmanuel described, Celia understood and lived Jesus' teachings throughout her pain-filled existence. And here, dear listener, it's a whole drama, right, Carol and John? This book is a real drama about the Roman life at the time, Jesus' teachings, and how people were treating each other, the dynamics of the time, and then besides all these cultural, religious, political context, we have the lives of families like the family of Celia, and how people are suffering the conspiracy of other minds who are jealous and envious and are slandering, and Celia becomes a true martyr. In one time point of her life, she almost like adopts a little baby, and you read the book and you know the reasons why she came to that scenario. And it's quite interesting because we'll see that in a dialogue very soon, she goes through many hardships, including the death of this much beloved son. But before we go to the dialogue, do you think the reader is going to take the reincarnation of the proud Roman senator Publius Lentulus as a slave that easy? Like, really? He changed all that much in 50 years?
Well, I think a new reader to Spiritism probably be a little difficult to accept, but somebody that has a small understanding of Spiritism would understand that when you have a life, a gifted life, and you're not grateful for what you have and you don't share that your next lifetime is going to be the opposite of what you had. And it doesn't surprise me, but it certainly would surprise a lot of people. And I would imagine that Emmanuel went through much retraining before he came back as the slave Nestoria. Because when you're reading the book, you see one of the things that really amazed many of the people that were associated with him was his wonderful understanding and grasp of philosophy and the scriptures and so forth, that he was very versed. He was almost a teacher.
That's true. Carol, what do you think about it? Is it surprising, do you think, for some readers as well, that quick transformation? Is it quick or should be average? What do you think?
Well, I think our concept of time, spiritual realm, it's different. So when we say it wasn't only a couple of years, it was only a couple of years here, but in the spiritual realm, in a couple of years, you can do a lot. And I agree with what John said. I think once he disincarnated and went to the spiritual realm, he probably took many classes and courses, and it was probably very hard on him. But as you see, at the end of the first book, he had already started to transform his heart and transform his understanding. So when he discarnated, he already had different feelings than when he met with Jesus just a couple of years earlier. Mm-hmm. Transformation is drastic, but I do think it's maybe uncommon. But it all depends on how much work we put in this lifetime, in between incarnations, and in the next. So I can't say, is it average or not average, because it's unique to each one of us.
Exactly. And in his case, he suffered so much throughout his previous life that it really opened a lot of permeability for him to change. It's not like he lived a very easy, smooth life until the end of previous life, and then the next life he is like, boom, changed. He really went through a lot of hardships, the loss of his son, and then the martyrdom of his wife, and then the slander, and then the killing of one of the sons of her best friend, and then when his daughter is constantly suffering, once because of the disease, then later the husband who abandoned. Later at the end he came back, but then she became blind. Then he's taken as hostage by the Jewish people, and then they blind him, and then it's a whole new phase, and then at the end he dies. in a very dramatic way. So certainly suffering, as the spirits say, is the best remedy for those who are too proud, too selfish, to crack their pride and selfishness, and we will say our pride and selfishness, into a greater, the best of us. So we're going to give a short break. When we come back, we're going to listen to a very excerpt of the book, 50 Years Later. It's about the dramatic point in Celia's life in which she is distraught in her heart by the fact that her adopted son dies. Let us go to a break. When we come back, we have more.
We will return to our program after these messages.
Be everyone's friend. Friendship is a treasure of the spirit to be shared with others. Like the sun, it radiates happiness to all who receive it. There is an immense shortage of friends on earth, and this causes conflicts and suspicions, imbalance and insecurity. When friendship is lacking, man is at risk. Be the kind friend, even if, for the time being, you experience misunderstandings and difficulties.
Available for purchase the book, This Obsession, psychographed by the medium Francisco Cândido Xavier. In this book, the spirit André Luiz recruits new groups of workers of goodness whose intent is to aid in the readjustment of those no longer in the physical plane. Learn more by purchasing your copy at www.fgny.org.
Kardec Radio, live, every Saturday at 11 a.m.
Nourish your soul with Kardec Radio.
Listen to our sister radio, Bazera Online Web Radio, retransmitting Kardec Radio shows 3 times a day. Also beautiful and inspiring programs in English, Spanish, and Portuguese. Go to www.spiritist.com.
And now we return to our program.
Dear listener, we are here discussing the many novels of Emmanuel. Emmanuel was the spirit author who wrote through the very beloved and missionary hands of Chico Xavier 5 incredible novels that can be life-changing. If you have stories about how these novels have changed your life, please write to us at kardec@kardecradio.com or go to kardecradio.com website. There's a contact form. Fill it out, send it to us. We'll be happy to hear from you how these novels have changed your life. Also, if you're listening to this, you're getting to know the main characters in each and every novel. Remember, the 10 listeners who send to us the very characters who are center stage in these novels will win Kardec Radio's T-shirt. Now, Carol and John are here from the Spiritist Society of Virginia, Carol Strosnider and John DeRosa, who are here to help us break down these amazing passages and teachings from the books. So let us listen now to this short excerpt when the main character, Celia, is very sad because her adopted son just dies. And somebody from the spiritual realm kindly comes, her grandfather, Neolucius, comes to her rescue and explain who was the very life that just passed away.
Soon after, the little adopted son of Celia dies. She cries of sadness. Celia managed to break through the emotions that had choked her and said in a sorrowful and dolorous tone,
"More than words, my heart, which your spirit can examine, can tell you of my joy and gratitude. Protector and friend, watchful guide of my soul, since you have come from the darkness of the tomb to bring me the most comforting truth, help me triumph in the painful struggles of life."
Celia's voice crackled. Listening to her supplications with the same expression of serenity and love in his eyes, Synesius Lucius moved slowly towards the baby's makeshift bed, illuminating his face with a gesture of his radiant hand and saying with a smile, "This, my child, is how Cyrus has kept his promise to return to the world to be closer to your heart under the blessings of the Lamb."
"Why didn't you tell me sooner?"
Because God wants all of us to spiritualize our love and seek its purest and most sublime expressions. By receiving a fondling as your brother, without allowing yourself to be led by any particular inclination, you learn how to sanctify your affection for Cyrus even more in the indissoluble bond of twin souls on the path to the most lucid spiritual achievements in a supreme redemption.
Dear listener, in each and every novel, we're going to find the very spirited principles. Here we're talking about the importance of reincarnation, the mechanism, the reincarnatory plan, and talking about family and spiritual ties. It's very interesting, Carol, that when Kinesius is telling Celia that baby is the very spirit of Cyrus. For those who haven't read, Cyrus is the former slave, the very son of Nestorius, and Cyrus discarnated as a martyr of Christianity, and Celia and him loved each other very, very much. He said in his final days, "Celia, I promise you I will be back and will be with you for eternity." And he comes back now as a child whom she adopts. She loves the child, but she doesn't know who he is. And she gets to know after he dies. And her grandfather comes in spirit to tell her why. Often we don't know the relationship we have with very people in our lives. This is not her biological son, but the love that unites us is beyond it. And he says, because God wants all of us to spiritualize our love and seek its purest and most sublime expression. Carol, let us discuss a little more about the importance of opening our hearts to the universal family, since someone in or out of our family tie may be a very loved one from a previous life.
This passage is great in showing us that our true family is not just our blood family, but our universal family. And that those that we encounter and who we think maybe we don't have any relationship might have been our brother, our sister, our mother. So we might in class, in school, encounter a good friend, and something might happen and we might not disregard them or put our family first. In this incarnation, we think that only our blood family is our family, but maybe that friend was our mother in a previous life. So we should seek to help not only our blood family, but those around us too, because there's a purpose why you have that schoolmate that is your friend, or that boss at work, or your neighbor. There's a purpose that those folks are in our lives. And if we remember this passage, remember, okay, I shouldn't help my neighbor because they're my neighbor. Well, they're my neighbor in this lifetime, but maybe in another lifetime they were somebody else. But most importantly, even if they were not related to me in a previous life, they're still my universal family. We're still all brothers and sisters. So I should help them no matter what. This passage is great to bring us the realization that it's not just about our blood ties, but also our universal family. And this doesn't just apply for those who adopt children. It applies to all of us, all of our relationships in this world.
Exactly. So John, how would we then best practice some daily exercises on how to expand our universal ties with the human family?
There's a couple of them that I can think of. Just ones that most of us would come up with is sort of volunteering to help at a hospital, maybe visiting the prisoners, feeding the homeless, but even more to the point of expanding outside of your family, something that many of us do and many of us push aside, and that is the person that lives next door to you, on either side of you, maybe behind you, and all too often getting to interact with those people sometimes can be difficult because they may not be the easiest person to get along with, but humbling yourself and doing something for that person, like maybe raking his leaves during the fall or cutting more of his grass for him during the summertime, bringing his trash cans in when he's not there. Little simple things that will show your concern for those particular people, inviting them over for a Sunday afternoon chat. Very, very mundane, simple things, but this is, to me, is how you, of course, my favorite one is walking the dogs, because then you meet so many other people.
Yeah. If you don't have the dogs, everything else you said would apply. For sure, John. And that exercise, observing the person, there is a great exercise when Eurípides Barçanufo said, when we look at each other, spirit to spirit, eye to eye, and we think, that person is a child of God, and where have we been before? And that person is as important for God as I am and everybody else in my life. So that constant awareness that we are equal before God will always boost our caring attitude towards the people in our lives. Because when we care, we are not indifferent. Because we can see in these novels by Emmanuel that the social caste at the time were so strong that people were allowed to despise and be indifferent to people in such a way that human rights didn't exist at the time. So for us today in the United States or in more developed areas in this world, it's almost like a remote idea we can have, and it's surreal to see how they treated slaves. The fact that there were slaves already, like, mind-blowing, because it's totally against our day-to-day laws, but it talks about how they treated and talked to people who were of a different social status, socioeconomic status. So there we have it. And then later, if we go back to some of the characters in this book 50 years later and put together with the ones in the 2,000 years ago, Emmanuel talks about some slaves who were very elevated, spiritually speaking, and after they died, it shows exactly how more elevated they were than the ones who were patricians. And one highlight for those who want to understand more about reincarnation is the very end of the book 50 years later, when Emmanuel discloses in the spirit realms how they are planning out the reincarnation of the very characters of this book. It's fascinating because sometimes we think people are not going to know what we're doing, but our conscious knows, and we're going to have to come to terms with our own conscious. We're going to give a short break, but when we come back, we're going to talk about a book that is most fascinating. It's the third novel of Emmanuel, entitled Hail Christ, when we come back.
We will return to our program after these messages.
A new masterpiece has just been released by EDI CEI of America, Memoirs of a Suicide by Yvonne Pereira, a phenomenal book about what happens to suicides in the afterlife. Truly instructive, it brings greater hope that no one really dies or spends eternity in damnation. A true account of the mercy and providence of God. Buy your copy today at www.ediceiofamerica.com.
Nourish your soul with Kardec Radio.
Come for the beautiful event sponsored by the British Union of the Spiritist Societies. It is the second British Spiritist Congress on May 11th and 12th at the Quakers Friends House in London, United Kingdom. For more information, please go to www.buss.org.uk.
Nourish your soul with Kardec Radio.
Are you seeking a way to tap into more spiritual you? Try meditation. As the Spirit Joanna D'Angelo says, meditation becomes an effective way to discipline the will. In the meditative state, you calm down your emotions and clarify your discernment, harmonizing your feelings. Take a listen to a clip from the CD entitled Health by Divaldo Franco and Joanna D'Angelis.
So say this: I am life, and a triumphant life. Say it again, and once again. Say, I am happiness in life. Repeat it. I am fulfilled, and so I shall remain. Look at yourself. You are irradiating His light. Again, look at yourself. You are irradiating His light. Breathe it. Hold it. Breathe out. Say to yourself, nothing of a disturbing nature deserves my attention.
If you want to listen to more, you can purchase your own copy online at www.ssbaltimore.org/bookstore.
And now we return to our program.
Dear listener, we are back, and we hope you are observing that if you send us an email, the top 10 persons who send us the first ones, that send us an email telling us which is the main character in each of the 5 novels of Emmanuel, will receive a Kardec Radio t-shirt. It's running out quickly, so we hope you do your part because it's something not to miss. Right now we're discussing the 3rd novel that Emmanuel wrote through the hands of Chico Xavier, entitled Hail Christ. Hail Christ is the novel in which Emmanuel talks about the very story of 2 main characters, father and son, Quintus Verus and Tessianus, 2 souls connected by many reincarnations and who met each other once again in the 3rd century of Christianity in a region controlled by the Roman Empire, especially in a region named Smyrna. And as an example of simplicity, trust, and love, the pioneers of good news devoted themselves to serving Christ, having as their sustenance only their power and unshakable faith. This is a moving story that shows how much true love can accomplish in its manifestations of solidarity on behalf of human individuals. Right now, we're going to listen to a short excerpt of the book in which one of the main characters, the father, Quintus Verus, he is already a Christian. For a truly dramatic experience that involves slander, hatred, he is obliged to leave the family, and the son, his son, Tatianus, is going to be brought up by another man, and it's a very dramatic story. But that is constantly breaking Quintus Varro's heart to a point in which the day after he sees his son, he is truly depressed, we would say, as Emmanuel describes here. He really fell into that depressive state. And here comes the beauty of knowing the description of the beautiful intervention of the spirit guides, the family spirits, who come to our aid at the most critical times. But there is a condition. Let us listen to this dialogue so we can break it down in greater detail.
Due to a particular drama in Quintus Varro's private life, he is now devoted to the Christian cause, while his son, Tatianus, is being raised by cruel minds of the time. On a particular night, he feels more deeply nostalgic about his son. He cries and recalls the figure of old Corvinus, who taught him everything about Jesus' message. To find new strength, he kneels down in prayer while sobbing. As he sat sobbing, with his head bowed over his knees in the exile of his room, he felt that a hand was resting lightly on his shoulders. With an ineffable smile that revealed melancholy and longing, love and hope, the entity spoke to him.
Varus, my son, why are you so dismayed when the fight has just begun? Rebuild your strength for the task ahead. We have been called to serve. The love between our souls is divine, an internal bond connecting us to each other for triumph in immortality. But what will become of this heavenly gift if we cannot renounce ourselves? The heart that is unable to surrender itself for the benefit of someone else's happiness is a dry seed that cannot grow. Tatianus is the son of the Creator, just like us. Do not complain about what he cannot give you.
So here we see many highlights in this dialogue. We'll briefly mention, because we have two more books to go through. Here, this excerpt is telling us about the importance of prayer and how prayer really opens the door for those who love us to come. And they not only console us, but they illuminate our minds. They clarify. They don't say, oh yeah, you're a poor thing. No, they are saying, look, remember, you need to renounce. You need to forgive about yourself. There are more people who need your love. And if your son is not open to receive your love, you have to wait because he cannot give it to you now. So it's a great book also for parents. The challenges of parenthood. It's not easy. Being a parent is a mission, and it's quite challenging, especially nowadays, but it has always been. And it's very difficult to go through parenthood without spiritual understanding, and even when we do, it is difficult, especially when we encounter frustration and disappointment, and that's the case of this very father. So we would also recommend Hail Christ for all parents who are out there suffering by the choices of their children, choices that most often than not go on the opposite direction to the ones that parents themselves have foreseen for their children. Right now, as we're talking about renunciation, we're going to open up for the very book, which is the fourth novel of Emmanuel. And it's on a crowning moment because he's telling about the story of a spirit named Alcyone, and she actually was so evolved, she has to return to the earth just to help the evolution and the progress of one of the souls she has most dear in her heart, Charles. And that lifetime of hers became very trying, filled with sacrifices and reparation, and it is a true example of profound devotion to her neighbor. She demonstrates her complete loyalty to assist the one for whom she has interceded so much on the spiritual plane. In this gripping historical novel, the Spirit Emmanuel takes us back to the frivolous Paris of the 17th century, a city replete with violent sentiments and materialistic illusions that conflict with the eternal truth of the soul. By means of the psychograph of Chico Xavier, the Spirit author's collaborator, we are introduced to another one of Emmanuel's incarnation, this time as Father Damiano, a priest at St. Vincent's Church in Avila, Spain, and the couple's contemporary protagonist. We're telling this also because this book talks much about historical, truthful elements of the first waves of immigration from Europe to North America. It's quite fascinating. And right now, to give you a teaser about this, one of the parts of this book, Alcyone is serving at a family, and it's all these novels have true dramas behind it. In this dialogue we're going to hear, Alcyone is talking to Mr. Davenport after his comments on the aspect of bringing the God at Home meeting. Let us listen to this dialogue so we can discuss with John and Karen a little bit about this very important teaching in this book.
And said Mr. Davenport to Alcyone, "Some time ago, my daughter, an American priest suggested that we start our fireside church sessions, since the family should be regarded as our primary sanctuary."
That was a commendable decision. My mother always said that the home is our divine temple.
I don't actually disagree, but I have often argued with my uncle about it. Why have a gospel worship at home when there are so many churches?
In that matter, Mr. Davenport, since we're not discussing our personal opinions about the teachings of the Master, I hope you'll forgive my frankness. I'm convinced that we are in our Father's house wherever we may be, and I'm certain that the day will come when we'll consider the whole world to be God's church. But in our present condition, with regard to Jesus' teachings, there should be no problem acknowledging the advantage of the churches and the sacred character of home worship. Moreover, there is always a great willingness to care for our ailing family members in the comfort of our homes. But that doesn't preclude the need of our hospitals. Loving parents always teach their children, but that doesn't matter that schools are not useful. In the matter of faith, our problem is that we have an erroneous view of religious responsibility. That is, we usually think a priest should do what we ourselves should actually do. A priest can be an excellent teacher in pointing us to the right direction, but it is ourselves who are in the journey towards God, and it is essential that we do not stop. Seeing, in that way, that the home is the best church because it offers daily opportunities for effort and worship. Each person will live with under the same roof is an altar of the service of kindness, love, and understanding. Each domestic problem is an opportunity to spread hope and faith. Each trial offers us a chance to test our trust in God. While this is happening at a home, religious organizations can function as a hospital for troubled souls, as granaries for the starving, as sources of sublime information. See, from that perspective, we can measure the value of small domestic accomplishments.
The Spirit Emmanuel is bringing to us the importance of something that is quite spiritual, the idea of bringing those reflections about God to our homes. Carol, you know, in Spiritism we have this practice and we recommend everyone, even if you come to Spiritist Center, you go to your church, but bring at least a weekly moment of reflection to your home. They here in the book, they talk about a daily meeting at home, but we're talking about at least once a week, right?
What we call the God at Home meeting.
Mm-hmm.
The recommendations in the publishings say once a week. Of course, if we can do it once every day, that would be great. But I think most of us, if we can aim to do it once a week, that would be great. And something we might want to remember is that we are never alone. So if you don't have a companion at home, anybody to join with you to do the God at Home, that doesn't mean we shouldn't do it. Because one, the mentors are always with us, and it is a chance for them to connect especially with us during those moments. So if we can dedicate 30 minutes of our time every week with whoever is in that home, or if you're by yourself, to read an edifying message, to pray. If we can, bring a cup of water, ask the water to be blessed. Those 30 minutes are very essential because it's the time the mentors will schedule to come and especially treat us during that time. Does that mean that they're not with us the rest of the time? Of course not. But it's a special moment for them. It helps them to connect with us and us to connect with them. So if we can get into the habit of that practice, it will be very good for us and for all of those in our home.
Exactly, and we want to clarify to the listener that the mentors are superior to ourselves, but they are not omnipotent like God. So they need a network of friends and superior spirits to themselves to come to our aid. So that's one of the main reasons why it's important to be very faithful and loyal to the very day and time of the week in which we schedule it. Because once it's scheduled, since the more superior illuminated spirits are so busy, our guides and mentors, if there is any particular need, they can request that higher spirits or more specialized spirits regarding a particular text come to the aid of ourselves and our family members, as Carol said. So right now, dear listener, I know you're enjoying, but we need to give a short break to finally come to the crowning novel of Emmanuel, Paul and Stephen.
We will return to our program after these messages.
Known as one of the most scientific books by Allan Kardec, The Genesis dives deeper into the origins of our planet to the advent of the new generations to come. Purchase your copy today, online or via your ebook reader. Go to www.ediceiofamerica.com today.
Nourish your soul with Kardec Radio.
Now in English, the book Action and Reaction by the Spirit Andrea Louise, psychographed by Chico Xavier. Buy your copy online or via your ebook reader. Go to www.ediceiofamerica.com today.
And now we return to our program.
Finally, dear listener, we are here to discuss a little bit and to also give you the opportunity to listen to some recordings, excerpts of this phenomenal best-selling book, Paul and Stephen. Paul and Stephen is beyond the story of Christianity. It's the story of ourselves. It's the story of Paul of Tarsus, a fanatical Pharisee and ruthless persecutor of Christians in the newborn Christian doctrine. This book will show the reader the greatness of Paul of Tarsus, a courageous, daring, and sincere man who repented for his radical posture that culminated in the stoning of Christianity's first martyr, Stephen, and who humbly undertook the accelerated revision of his ideas in answer to Jesus' call. Amid persecutions, infirmities, mockery, disillusionment, desertions by friends, stoning, beatings, and imprisonments, he transformed his life into a legacy of work through dozens of years of struggle by founding churches and rendering them assistance. At some point in our lives, we all received Christ's call, and what have we done? So it's the very book that will tell us about this call. John, one of the main statements by the Spirit author Emmanuel in this book, in the very preface, tells us in these precise words that this book was written to demonstrate that this struggle is an example of how much effort we must put in our own endeavor to meet Jesus. What can we make of this statement by Emmanuel?
It means that I have a lot more work to do, that's for sure.
We all do.
It is when you read this book and you understand the type of person that Saul was, the arrogance that he had about his knowledge of the Mosaic Law, and how he went through this struggle to basically try to eradicate the Christians because it was impinging on their beliefs. They just had a real tough time accepting the Messiah, the Christ. And then his change as God asked him to be on his side and why he was persecuting us. And you see the years he spent in the desert to reconstruct himself, to basically eradicate the arrogance and become the humble and serene person that came out of the desert, and to then go and use all of his energy to bring the Gentiles or introduce to the Gentiles Christ's message. It's just beyond words to think of the effort that man put in to save himself and to move towards Jesus. And to think I need to do that is it's a little sobering.
Exactly. It's a true invitation. Talking by invitation, John. Now we have here a short excerpt of this very preface of Emmanuel when he talks about something that is dear to all of our hearts, because he's talking about the fact that Jesus has called us one by one. Let us just listen, because it's a 2-minute long excerpt, and soon after we'd like to invite Kara to help us understand the possible reasons why we, in spite of being called, we are often distant in regard to the call. Let us listen.
The fact is that the unforgettable weaver and tent maker did indeed have his own divine ministry. But who in this world does not have a ministry from God? Many will say they do not know what their particular calling is, that they are ignorant in this respect. However, we will answer that. Besides ignorance, there is neglect and much pernicious caprice. Those who are more exacting will remark that Paul received a direct call from God. But in reality, all ordinary men and women have been personally called to serve Christ. The form may vary, but the essence of the summons is always the same. The call to the ministry sometimes arrives subtly, unexpectedly. Most people, however, are resistant to the Lord's generous invitation. Very well, Jesus is not a master of forceful means, and if the figure of Paul appears to be greater in our eyes, it is because he hearkened to the call, repented, denied himself, took up his cross, and followed Christ to the end of his work on the earth. Amid persecution, infirmities, derision, mockery, disillusionment, desertions, stonings, beatings, and imprisonment, Paul of Tarsus was a courageous and sincere man, walking in the darkness of the world to meet the Master who made himself heard at the crossroads of his life. Paul was much more than a predestined individual. He was an accomplisher who strived daily to reach the light. The Master calls him from his realm of immortal radiance. Paul fumbles in the darkness of human experience and replies, "Lord, what would you have me do?" Between Jesus and him, there was an abyss, which the apostle crossed over in the decades of ongoing redemptive struggle.
So, Carol, why do you think most people have heard a call, they ignored it, Some people are like, have I been called? I don't recall it.
There's two main reasons why most of us either don't recall the call or ignore the call to serve God. And those are selfishness and unhealthy pride. Selfishness, thinking just about ourselves, our needs, my family, my this, me this, I this, and the pride, thinking we're better than everybody else. Oh, I don't need to learn anything else. I don't need to do anything because I know it all and I have it all and this will never happen to me, so I don't need to. Those attitudes, I think, are the things that make us not remember the call or ignore the call. And we might think it's easier for our life, I'm doing these air quotation marks here, are seemingly easy, that we're very comfortable in our life, that we don't need to change. If we don't change in this lifetime, as we mentioned about the first book, on the book 2,000 years ago, how Publius, he didn't listen and how much pain he suffered, and you mentioned everything that he went through, and at the end, him recognizing that maybe if he had made a different decision early on in his life, things would have been much different. So I think that's when we don't listen, when we're selfishness and when we have pride.
Exactly, and it's quite interesting because as we were talking about not listening because of pride and selfishness, when we go to chapter 10 of this book, Paul and Stephen, we follow through the whole description about the persecution of the first Christians at Paul's time, at Saul's time, in which Stephen is being stoned to death. And in the description, Emmanuel describes to us that by the time Saul later will be Paul, is there happy to see that his enemy, quote unquote, Stephen, is dying. Stephen observes that Jesus is watching, and Emmanuel describes seeing Jesus sadly contemplating the doctor of Tarsus, as if to grieve his condemnable detour. We're not going to continue. Stop here. We're talking about a reincarnatory plan. When we receive the call, we're talking about before we reincarnate, we have a plan. Clearly, we're never destined to commit any detour in our lives. First of all, we're not predestined to become criminals, to become serial killers, to become persecutors of anyone, or an outlaw, or whatever we want to name it. But we detour. So John, in this very passage, Emmanuel describes to us the detour of Saul's life. Can we elaborate more about the importance of being attuned to our reincarnatory plan, though we may not recall the details of it?
I would imagine that before Saul reincarnated, that he obviously had studied much because he knew the Mosaic law inside and out. He was a very learned rabbi, and he may have studied so that he would be so very knowledgeable.
But the Mosaic law says in the commandments, don't kill. So probably he didn't observe the most important part of Mosaic law. He really was distracted, as Carol said, the reasons why pride and selfishness, and you said it yourself, like he was really blinded by his pride of being a doctor of the law and not allowing the humbleness of Jesus' message shine, because it was really more strong than what he has been learning all his life, right?
Well, yeah, he would have to change so much, and humble was obviously not something that was part of his life. He certainly had a very, very attraction to Abigail, and the reason he was attracted to her is because she was such a wonderfully humble, and she loved God, I guess is the proper term. They were the type of people that understood that message that Christ preached. And the other side of it, his desire to put these Christians down, just drove him. And again, as Carol was saying, you're saying that pride and that selfishness, because he'd have to basically let go let go of all this studying that he had done.
Letting go of the ego.
Exactly.
Exactly. So right now, for all life struggles, there is a formula in this book. There is a formula for all life struggles. One in which Abigail comes to Paul's rescue when he's already changed, transformed, but he's struggling. Like many of us, when we change, it's hard. In this book, we're going to learn that the pathway to transformation is not a day, a simple shift. It is a process. There is a day in which we shift awareness, but after that shift in awareness, there's a long road to really create a new habit, a new conditioning. And we're going to listen now to the dialogue between Abigail and Saul. She is discarnated. She comes back after he prays. He is very challenged by the new moment of his life, and she brings very straightforward points that we would say it's almost like a formula for happiness and achievement and success, accomplishments in life. We're going to listen to this now.
Saul had barely awakened from this rapture when he was taken by a new surprise of someone walking softly towards him. In a few more instants, he saw Stephen and Abigail in front of him, young and beautiful, dressed in garments so white and radiant that they looked more like shrouds of translucent snow. Incapable of expressing the sacred emotion engulfing his soul, Saul of Tarsus knelt and began to weep. Brother and sister, who had returned to encourage him, drew nearer, smiling broadly. "Get up, Saul," said Stephen with profound kindness.
"What is this? You weep? Would you feel so discouraged when your task has just begun?"
Now back on his feet, Saul wept convulsively. Those tears were not only the relief of a heart forsaken by the world, they expressed boundless joy and immense gratitude to Jesus, always lavish with his watch care and benevolence. He wanted to kiss Stephen's hands, to beg for forgiveness for the tragic past, but it was the martyr of the way who, in light of his glorious resurrection, embraced the former rabbi effusively, as if Saul were a beloved brother. After kissing his brow, he whispered tenderly, "Saul, do not stay stuck in the past. Who in the world is exempt from wrongdoings? Only Jesus was sinless." Gamaliel's former disciple felt immersed in a veritable sea of bliss. He wanted to speak of his boundless joy, to give thanks for such a gift, but uncontrollable emotion sealed his lips and confronted his soul. Aided by Stephen, smiling at him in silence, he saw Abigail, more beautiful than ever, reminding him of the spring flowers at the humble house on the road to Joppa. He could not escape his thoughts as a man or forget his shattered dreams, remembering them above all at that glorious moment of his life. He thought of the home he might have had, the tenderness with which the young woman from Corinth would have taken care of their dear children, the irreplaceable love that her devotion could have given him. But understanding his innermost thoughts, his spirit betrothed took his right hand, calloused by the hard labor in the desert, and spoke to him movingly.
"We shall never lack a home. Our home shall be in the hearts of all those who come our way. As for our children, we have the immense family that Jesus has bequeathed us in his mercy. The children of the Calvary are our children too. They are everywhere, awaiting their inheritance from the Savior."
Saul understood the loving admonishment and stored it in the core of his heart.
Do not hand yourself over to disheartenment. Our ancestors knew the God of armies, of bloody triumphs, the gold and the silver of this world. We, however, know the Father who is the Lord of our hearts. The law accentuated our faith by the wealth of material gifts and sacrifices, but the gospel knows us by our inexhaustible trust and active faith in the service of the Almighty. You must be faithful to God, Saul. Even if the whole world were to turn against you, you would still have the boundless treasure of a faithful heart. The triumphant peace of Christ lies in the industrious soul that obeys and trusts in Him. Do not refuse to accept great suffering. Empty your mind of worldly thoughts. Once you have exhausted the last drop of the flask of earthly disappointments, Jesus will fill your spirit with light immortal.
Experiencing infinite consolation, Saul was vexed at not being unable to utter a word. Abigail's exhortations would be with him forever. Never again would he allow discouragement to overwhelm him. An enormous hope now filled his soul. He would work for Christ everywhere and in all circumstances. The Master had sacrificed himself for all humankind. To dedicate his life to him represented a noble duty. While he was formulating these thoughts, he remembered the difficulty he had in getting along with other people. He would encounter struggle. He remembered Jesus' promise that he would be present wherever there were brethren gathered in his name. However, everything seemed suddenly difficult in this quick intellectual analysis. The synagogues were fighting amongst themselves. The Church of Jerusalem itself was once more leaning towards Judaizing influences. Abigail again answered his innermost appeals with infinite tenderness.
You ask for people who are in agreement with you in the construction of the gospel. You must remember, however, that even Jesus did not have them. The apostles could not concur with the Master except with help from heaven after the resurrection and Pentecost. Those most beloved to him slept as he prayed in agony in the garden. Some denied him. Others fled at the decisive hour. Be in agreement with Jesus only and work. The way to God is subdivided into a veritable infinity of planes. The Spirit will pass along from one realm to the next. All spiritual evolution is difficult, but only thereby we will find true victory. Remember the narrow door of the gospel lesson and press on. When the time is right, Jesus will call to your endeavors those who can concur with you in His name. Dedicate every moment of your life to the Master. Serve Him with energy and tenderness, as someone who knows that spiritual accomplishments demand the concourse of all the sentiments that ennoble the soul.
Saul was in ecstasy. He could not express the feelings of love, and his heart overcome with ineffable bliss. New hopes blossomed in his soul. A radiant future was unfolding before the eyes of his spirit. He wanted to move, to give thanks for this sublime gift, but his emotions deprived him of any expression of affection. One big question, however, still hovered in his mind: what to do from here on out to triumph? How to fulfill the sacred notions that fell to him to put into practice, without taking note of the sacrifices involved. Letting him perceive that she heard his innermost questions, Abigail offered lovingly,
Saul, to be sure of victory on the difficult pathway, remember that it is necessary to give. Jesus gave everything He had to the world, and above all, He gave us the intuitive understanding of our own weaknesses in order for us to tolerate human miseries.
The young Tarson noticed that at this point Stephen was bidding him goodbye, casting a paternal look in his direction. Abigail, in turn, held his hands tighter with immense tenderness. The former rabbi wanted to prolong the beautiful vision for the rest of his life, to be with her forever. But the cherished spirit displayed a gesture of affectionate farewell. Saul then made an effort to hurriedly list all his spiritual needs, desirous to hear her on the problems facing him. Anxious to make the most of the smallest fragment of the glorious, fleeting minute, Saul mentally arrayed a large number of questions. What could he do to acquire a perfect understanding of Christ's designs?
Love,
answered Abigail spontaneously. But how could he proceed in order to grow richer in divine virtues? Jesus ordered us to love even our enemies. He realized, however, how difficult it would be to do that. It was difficult to practice devotion without others' real comprehension. What could he do for his soul to reach such an elevated expression of the effort in Jesus Christ?
work,
explained his beloved, smiling kindly. Abigail was right. It was necessary to work for inner progress. He ardently desired to do so. For this reason, he had isolated himself in the desert for more than 1,000 days. However, upon returning to the environment of collective effort at the side of former friends, he had nourished blossoming hopes that soon turned into heartbreaking bewilderment. What measures could he adopt against such destructive discouragement?
Hope nonetheless.
She said further, in a gesture of tender solicitude, like someone who wished to clarify that the soul must be ready to attend to the divine plan in any circumstance, regardless of any personal whims. As he listened to her, Saul remembered that hope had always been with him in his most difficult days. He would know how to hope in the future with the blessings of the Most High. He would trust in his mercy. He would not disdain the opportunity for redemptive service. But what about other people? Everywhere, confusion flourished in their spirits. He, in fact, realized that overall agreement regarding the teachings of the Divine Master represented one of the most difficult tasks besetting the unfolding of the gospel. But more than that, people also seemed uninterested in the truth or enlightenment. The Jews were clinging to the law of Moses, intensifying the system of Pharisaic hypocrisy. The followers of the way were getting closer to the synagogues, avoiding the Gentiles and submitting strictly to the practice of circumcision. Where was the freedom in Christ? Where was the endless hope that this love had brought to all humankind without excluding the children of other peoples? He agreed that loving, working, and hoping were indispensable. But how was he to behave among such diverse forces? How was he to reconcile the grand lessons of the gospel with human indifference? Abigail squeezed his hands, and even more tenderly, to show that she was saying goodbye, and emphasized gently,
forgive.
Then her shining figure seemed to dissolve, as if made from fragments of sunshine. Enraptured by this marvelous revelation, Saul was now alone, without knowing how to come to grips with his own wonderment. In that region, crowned with infinite brightness, he had felt vibrations of mysterious beauty. From far away, the echoes of sublime, sidereal harmonies continued to reach his ears, seemingly bringing messages of love originating on distant suns. Saul knelt and prayed. He thanked the Lord for the wonder of his blessings. Within moments, as if an imponderable power had returned him to the earthly realm, he felt himself back on his impoverished rustic bed among the rocks. Incapable of explaining the prodigious phenomena, Saul of Tarsus gazed up at the heavens enraptured.
As you have listened, this is a book, dear listener, that tells the main messages on how we can deal with life struggles. These books by Emmanuel are really life-changing. Right now, I would like to invite John and Carol to really outline their final comments for us the listeners at Kardec Radio. John, would you like to tell us first your final comments regarding Emmanuel's novels as a whole?
What I get out of each one of these is humble yourself and help people as much as you possibly can.
That's a good summary. Yeah, as the spirits say, the better the idea, the more summarized it is, and you got to the point. Thank you, John, for being with us here at Kardec Radio, for helping us break down the illumination of these teachings in Emmanuel's novels. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Carol, a final wrap-up for Emmanuel's novels to the listener. What would be your final comment?
I think Emmanuel brings to us that transformation is a process, and as a process that takes place every single day. And we should think every single day about the decisions we're making and pray and ask, are these God's will? Because the key is for us to be selfless and for us to have faith in God. And with those two things, we can evolve much faster and be happier faster. That's what I take from his books.
You're right, Carol. Thank you so much for this, because it brings a lot of consolation to us, especially to those who are in a life-changing experience and are sometimes frustrated that they want to change and it's not simple. When you read this book, especially Paul and Stephen, as Carol said, we will go through the very, very idea that transformation is a process. It doesn't happen overnight. It depends on a lot of new conditioning, but it is possible. It may be hard, but not impossible. So thank you, Carol, also for being with us, for helping us understand more and introducing us these fantastic novels to the reader and to the listener at Kardec Radio. Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
We will return to our program after these messages.
Spiritist Network, your gateway to on-demand Spiritist videos. www.spiritistnetwork.com.
Spread the word. Kardec Radio, to learn more about Spiritism.
Want to find a good way to explain life after physical death to kids or teenagers? Check out the book Message from a Teen in the Spirit World by the Spirit Neo Lucio and psychographed by Chico Xavier. In this book, a teenager named Carlos explains his impressions on the new life in the spirit realm with his discarnate relatives and new friends. Purchase your copy online at www.ssbaltimore.org.
The Spiritist Magazine is a trimestral digital periodical that publishes the latest news on the Spiritist thought and the movement in the USA and worldwide. Subscribe now at www.spiritistmagazine.com.
Listen to our sister radio, Bazera Online Web Radio, retransmitting Kardec radio shows 3 times a day. Also beautiful and inspiring programs in English, Spanish, and Portuguese. Go to www.spiritist.com.
The book, A Primer on Being Good by the Spirit May, psychographed by the medium Chico Xavier, explains in simple language appropriate for children 2 paths in life, the path of good or the path of evil. God has granted us the freedom to choose either one. Purchase your copy online at www.ssbaltimore.org.
Now we return to our program.
Hi everyone, I'm James Morota. Today I'm going to talk a little about forgiveness. We human beings have never been very good at forgiving, have we? We think we'll lose something if we forgive. That happens because we forget we make mistakes too, and therefore we can hurt people's feelings too. And when it happens, we will need other people's forgiveness. Forgiveness many times is seen as a weakness, especially by those who think justice and vengeance are the same thing. Many times, it's a matter of peer pressure when we decide not to forgive someone because the people we live with will not approve of our decision. That happens a lot with teenagers, doesn't it? On the other hand, we sometimes imagine we are practicing forgiveness by accepting all kinds of abuse and aggression passively, when we are just ignoring and denying reality, refusing to recognize something is wrong. It's neither one thing nor the other. But if you want to live in peace with our own conscience, and if we don't want to carry the weight of sorrows like a prisoner dragging heavy chains around, we must learn why and how to forgive. Remember, the offender is probably going through a series of emotional and spiritual disturbances, and will have to face the consequences later, often under the burden of regret and remorse. But on that, let's listen to these words by Emmanuel. How to forgive. In most cases, the necessity of forgiveness emerges between us and our closest ones when the sweet juice of confidence turns sour in our hearts. That happens because the deepest resentments usually come up between the spirits who are bonded to each other in the trail of everyday life. Whenever our relationships with certain friends become ill, because according to our opinion, they have become our opponents, we should ask ourselves sincerely, how to forgive if forgiving doesn't reduce itself to a matter of lips, but it's a problem that affects the innermost mechanisms of feelings. After doing that, we must hurry to recognize that the creatures in error belong to God and not to us, that we also have mistakes to correct and ongoing readjustments, that it's not fair to retain them under our point of view, when they are, just like it happens to us, under the will of the divine wisdom, concerning what is best to each one in the way of improvement and progress. Then, we must remember the blessings such creatures have enriched us with in the past, and keep them in our cult of gratitude, according to what life dictates. We must remember as well that God has already granted them new opportunities of action and elevation in other sectors of service, and that it will be senseless of us to keep complaints about them when God doesn't deny them love and trust. When you give yourself to God, giving your opponents to God as real brothers of yours, as in need of the divine help as we are, you will penetrate the true meaning of the Christ's words. Forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors, then reconciling yourself with life and with your own soul. By doing so, you will know again how to kiss the faces of those who have offended you, and they will find God with you and will tell you with the purest joy in their hearts, may you be blessed. Well, dear listeners, may God be with you until next time.
Deck Radio listeners, welcome back to the Spiritist Moment. We are continuing to study the law of destruction. As we study the other questions in this particular chapter that is located in Part 3 of the Spirit's book, we continue to learn that the law of destruction is very interesting. So much so that the Spirits tell us that it has a dual purpose in maintaining the balance of reproduction. Not only that, but it's interesting to note that inasmuch as the law of destruction, ironically, comes right after the law of preservation in the Spirit's book, we learn that both have a balance within itself, that there is this law of destruction for things to be destroyed, but we also have that law and necessity of preservation to preserve ourselves, self-preservation, really, as the Spirits tell us, for a purpose. That way, the Spirits tell us that we don't die too soon, and we fulfill our particular tasks, because without that law and that self-preservation instinct, we might never fulfill our purpose here in this life. The Spirits tell us it's like that secret voice that tells us to avoid death, and that instead tells us that we have more to live for, so we can fulfill and progress. But interestingly enough, Kardec and the wise spirits, they inform us that the more evolved we become, and more evolved thus our planet becomes, the need for destruction will either diminish or disappear altogether, especially on more pure physical and moral states. Interesting for us, and even hard to fathom. So there is truly something comforting in this when we see cities or towns or sections of places in a city that are being destroyed by natural calamities, hurricanes, anything we may even think of in terms of disasters. We know that God is playing a part in that, and that there must be balance, that although some things are being destroyed, we know that also it will be renewed, and even the atmosphere itself will also be cleaned. So, dear friends, every time we see a natural disaster, something be destroyed, let us take a moment to pray, knowing that we are witnessing the renovation of a people, of ourselves, and the world that we're living in. Let us reflect as we encourage you to read the Spirit's book, Enlighten Yourselves. Follow along with our study. It's Part 3 of the Spirit's book, The Law of Destruction. Enlighten yourselves and find your way to your own inner happiness with the divine natural laws. And until next time, we wish you many blessings.
Dear friend, we meet again today to go on in our comments on the first chapter of the Gospel according to Spiritism. This time focusing on a message by a spirit called himself or herself an Israelite spirit. He points out something that is actually one of the most controversial points whenever we talk about religion or religion institutions. He says that in ancient times like the ones Moses lived, the peoples were not prepared to understand loftier or more spiritual or moral approaches or religion. We then made a comment bringing Jesus ideas that were actually in the same direction. Spiritism, as it shows us the rational knowledge of what has been always in the realms of mysticism, also brings us the challenge of making a difference between physical, earthly religious approach and the truly spiritual moral religion, that one able to open a true pathway on which science, philosophy, and religion are always hand in hand towards mankind's future world of regeneration. This spirit also says, we quote, "The time has come in which moral ideas must be developed to bring about the progress determined by God. They will follow the same route as that taken by the idea of liberty. Do not think, however, that these developments will be effected without a fight. No, in order to reach maturity, these ideas will need discussion and conflicts so that they may attract the attention of the masses. Once this has been achieved, the beauty and sanctity of this morality will touch all spirits. who will in turn embrace a science which will give them the key to a future life and open the doors to eternal happiness. Moses showed humanity the way. Jesus continued his work. Spiritism will finish it. Well, my friend Allan Kardec, in his amazing Spirits magazine, also wrote persistently on this matter. Listen, please, very attentively to what he, the brilliant and enlightened Allan Kardec, says on a free translation of a topic from that magazine dated back in December of 1868. We quote, "Every religious get-together, whatever cult they belong to, is based on the sharing of thoughts. It is exactly there where they can and should perform their strength, because the goal ought to be the liberation of the thoughts from the bonds of matter. Unfortunately, most of these groups get away from this principle as their religion becomes a matter of form." Wasn't this why Jesus Christ had always been persecuted for? Those who regarded religion first through its dogmas and rituals were clearly against this spiritual freedom Jesus established boldly among men. When the adulterous woman came to speak to him, his last words to her, instead of, "Come, pay something to my disciples because we need this or that in order to fulfill our ministry," he said, "Go and do not sin anymore." Thank you so much, my friend.
Thank you for listening to Kardec Radio, broadcasting live every Saturday morning at 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Email us and share your comments at www.kardecradio.com. Until next time, we wish you many blessings.